Stories of Kenyan migrant workers in distress in Gulf countries have been in the headlines. The Ministries of Foreign Affairs and Labor have subsequently responded with new measures, which we'll get into, and this forms tonight's discussion on whether the interventions will make a difference in keeping the thousands of Kenyans working abroad safe. I have a panel of experts in the field on standby, but first, let's take a look at some quick facts on the labor situation in the Gulf region. Now, from government records, the most popular destinations for Kenyan migrant workers in the Gulf region are the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Oman, Bahrain, and more recently, Lebanon, Iraq, and Jordan. Well, Kenya currently has signed bilateral labor agreements with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. It has also developed agreements with Oman, Kuwait, Jordan, and Bahrain. Now, the most common jobs Kenyans take up in these countries are in hospitality, construction, security, transport, cleaning, and domestic services. Now, let's zero in on Saudi Arabia, that hosts the biggest number of Kenyan migrant workers in the Gulf region. At least 80,000 Kenyans live and work in Saudi Arabia, with a majority serving as domestic workers. Interestingly, Saudi Arabia ranks third in remittances to Kenya after the United States and the United Kingdom. Now, a report by the Senate Committee on Labor and Social Welfare revealed in the last 3 years there have been a rising number of distress calls coming from Kenyans working in Gulf countries. Well, this was echoed by a recent Global Fund to End Modern Slavery report that revealed 99% of Kenyan migrant workers said they had been abused. Well, the violations ranged from wages being withheld to sexual and physical abuse. Now, as far as measures go, the Ministry of Labor has called for introduction of a wage protection program and a distress alert line to security agencies, in addition to establishing a protection and support department. Also, a mechanism that allows employees to change employers has been proposed, as well as a better definition of exit, return, and final exit procedures with delays in processing complaints. There's also a call to ensure cases are resolved in 21 days and the launch of a toll-free line, as well as a web portal to report migrant worker distress cases. Before we introduce our panel, let's take a look at what the Ministry of Foreign Affairs had to say a bit earlier this week on the matter.
Culturally, unyenyekevu ule ambao unahitajika kazi zingine za nyumbani sio unyenyekevu ambao unapatikana sana kati ya watu wetu. So sometimes our people will not be so subservient, and when they go to these countries and they're under contract, and in a country like in Saudi Arabia, their traditions around housework are very ancient, let's put it that way. So you find that the people who suffer the terrible beatings, the people who suffer abuse, are usually people who are of that category.
All right, and that was the Foreign Affairs Principal Secretary, Ambassador Macharia, speaking earlier this week. And on my panel tonight, we have Teresa Wakubo, a migrant labor specialist at the Kenya Union of Domestic Hotels, Educational Institutions and Hospital Workers, and Ida Muli, co-founder of Migrant Defenders. Teresa, let me begin with you. When you saw the government interventions come through this week, what was your reaction? Will it actually help, or is it a matter of too little, too late?
Basically, I would say it is not too little, too late, but better late than never. And I just want to note that, yes, the interventions are in place, but still these interventions are not adequate enough to look into the challenges that migrant workers are facing, particularly in the Middle East countries, having singled out Saudi Arabia. And this brings us as a country to relook and rethink at how we prepare our migrant workers before leaving the country to specific countries of destination for employment purposes. Thank you, Victoria.
Ida, you were a domestic worker in Bahrain, and you also shared your story about how you underwent abuses. What exactly did you go through while you worked there?
At the time that I left Kenya, I was like treated that I'm going to work in an office, but I ended up being sold to some strangers. On arrival at Bahrain, I was picked up and taken to a household where I didn't know people or anyone or any Kenyan. I didn't have a phone. So my passport was taken from the airport and I ended up doing the work. I didn't have Wi-Fi. I didn't have any number for calling my people back in Kenya. So the time when I decided to quit the job is when the boss abused me. They picked me up. And I tried to look for my sister's number. Then I messaged her to the number of my agent from Kenya, and both in Bahrain. The one in Kenya had blocked me, and the one in Bahrain was not responding to my distress. So I managed to, not escaping, but calling the police. But when they noticed that I'm calling, I was physically beaten and locked up in a room. So the agent from Bahrain came and picked me. So I decided to tell them what I'm going through. I'm working without any salary or food. I didn't have a place to sleep because I was sleeping on the kitchen floor of store. So it's not an easy thing. The agent came and told me, now I'm going to go with you to my office and please tell the other person that I'm working with the whole truth. So she didn't have the original documents for the office. It was illegal office over there, even in Kenya. So they sold my passport again to another person where I worked for some months without salary again. I was working for 3 months as they canceled the visa, but I ended up being told to leave the house because I didn't come for holiday. So after working, the driver was requested to take me to the office, and the office was like asking me to refund back the money that was paid by the employer, the second employer. That was like 700 Bahrain dinari, about 230,000 Kenya shillings. For me, I know my rights. So I told them, I didn't sign anything. Could you please tell me where I signed so that I can work here? And yet I said I don't want to continue working. So after that, I was locked up in an apartment where the office put their domestic workers and other people who have refused to work. You're tortured there. You stay for like 2 weeks without food until you produce the money that they are demanding from your family. So when I told them I have an injury from my boss who had abused me, the first house, there's a friend of mine in Kenya called Nicholas. I told him that I'm going through so much too. A Kenyan lady was also in the same hostel. I told him to look for someone who can help me to come back to Kenya or even contact my family. He did that. And he looked for Heart Kenya and through the Catholic CJPC of Utawala. And they looked for an hospital around the Bahrain area where I was. I sent my location and they got the American Mission Hospital. Mm-hmm. And I was supposed to book for an appointment, though this secretary for the apartment where I'm locked in, they are locking me inside with injuries. I can't go outside. It's when I called the 999, the police came and they rescued me after the office threw me on the street with my bags. I don't know anyone or anywhere to go. So the police told me, just come, say the truth. We are going to help you. They helped me to find justice. I also knew my rights. I told them I didn't sign anything. And if I signed anything, my family can pay back the money. The agent was locked down immediately. both here in Kenya and in Bahrain.
Okay. And hold that thought, Ida, because we'll come back to also what led you to start or co-found the organization Migrant Defenders. But let me come to you, Teresa, because we hear this all too often for workers, especially domestic workers heading to the Gulf region. And despite the horror stories that we hear, you still have thousands of young women getting on flights, heading over there with no clear idea of what it is they're going to encounter on the other side. So how can they be better prepared? And we heard the Foreign Affairs Permanent Secretary, rather Principal Secretary, Ambassador Macharia Kamau, saying, we haven't trained them enough. They need to be trained on the cultural differences as well. So what needs to be done to better prepare them?
So basically, Victoria, I'll start by saying that the high levels of unemployment in our country is a major push factor. Majority of the migrant workers, be it the youth, the women, and anyone who wishes to migrate out of the country. We are living through harsh economic times, and once the country is not in a position to offer employment to the citizens, then people will venture into any provided alternatives to earn a living, to put food at table. That notwithstanding, Victoria, I'd say as a country we are not doing very well, though there are efforts that are being put in place by our government to better protect and, on the other hand, promote labor migration from Kenya to other countries and to the GCC, Saudi Arabia being one of them. I think the measures that are put in place are still not adequate. I'll begin by mentioning our national laws. Basically, our national laws do not adequately look into the interests wholesomely and the welfare of migrant workers from Kenya to other countries for employment. To better prepare migrant workers as a country and all the stakeholders involved in issues of labor migration, it is very important for us to be able to enhance capacity of migrant workers on how they can be able to migrate, if they so wish, out of the country in a safe environment. This I will add to say that it is important for migrant workers to be able to identify genuine recruitment agencies from illegal recruitment agencies, or rather sometimes known as the brokers. Majority of migrant workers have ended up in the hands of the brokers and in situation of distress are left at the mercy of anyone who would beat them, which is not a good situation for both the migrant worker and for us as a country. It is very vital that before migrant workers leave the country, there is attestation done by the Ministry of Labour, and that the agents that are sending these migrant workers out of the country are genuine recruitment agents, accredited recruitment agents that are further then registered at the National Employment Authority, which operates under the Ministry of Labour and Social Protection. It is important that migrant workers enter into contracts. These employment contracts should be in a language that the migrant worker is able to read and understand. We have had instances whereby migrant workers' contracts are written in Arabica, a language the migrant worker may not understand. And sometimes if interpretation is not appropriately done, the migrant worker ends up entering into a contract that they're not sure of, that they do not even understand the terms and conditions of employment. It is categorically important that the contracts of employment clearly indicate the nature of work. We have often had instances from returning migrant workers who are lured into being taken out of the country for employment,
right,
for purposes of, for example, professional jobs like teaching or working in the hotel sector, but then ended up as domestic workers more so in Saudi Arabia. So not all domestic workers working in Saudi Arabia left the country to work as domestic workers. We have some professionals that were lured and were promised heaven never to come, only to find that they are in strange countries with a job description, one that probably they had not intended to leave the country and go and work under. We have also had challenges of contract substitution.
Yeah.
One that I have alluded to earlier, substitution probably from a teacher or a nurse to a domestic worker. That has been a very common practice in Saudi Arabia. And also sometimes accommodation is not clearly stipulated in their contracts of engagement.
Okay, let me bring Ida in really quickly on that, because Ida, when you were sharing your story, you kept saying, I knew my rights, I knew my rights. And that's not the case for a lot of, these young people heading over to the Gulf countries to work. What are you doing through your organization to help them become more aware of their rights before they head over there?
Our organization seeks to include current migrant workers and the ones who have returned. So we sensitize and advocate on rights of migrant workers. There are some laws which have been passed, like if someone dies while at work, the family should bring back the money, not the family to raise the money. So we need to meet these people and educate them on what to do, prepare them physically and mentally what they will experience. Because myself and my co-founder, we were both victims of these violations, but because we knew about it, that's when we decided to come up with Migrant Defenders Organization that will be defending the rights of migrant workers. Because through my story, I've been interviewed by different organizations like ILO and other organizations that usually tell me I was brave enough to report the agency. And it's not easy accusing your employer and the agent to be closed down in a foreign country, making sure you're back safe, you have your passport with you. So these ladies that are planning to go, we usually sit with them down. If someone is willing to go, we tell them, in case of anything, there's some organization over there that you can reach to, or maybe you can reach to me through my number. I've helped several ladies who have come back to Kenya from Bahrain, where I was, and others in Saudi. They also reach on me after they saw my stories and my interviews. And we are planning also to recruit the former migrant workers who are back here in Kenya to work with us, so that we can create an awareness of mentality that many people think everyone who's going there is illiterate. Some of us, we have degrees and diplomas. We used to work before we decided to go for these jobs. Just because of responsibilities back at home, that's why you find people traveling to work for greener pastures. But once you arrive in those foreign countries, if you don't know anyone or anything, you'll end up being a victim of human trafficking and abuse. But if you know your rights, it's easy for you to say, no, I don't want to continue working. I want to go back to my country. I want to speak about my story so that I may inspire other people who are willing to go so that they may know what is happening there. And also create an awareness that even here in Kenya, we can still make it. You can do something, you can have startups, you can encourage one another through counseling and creating. We have donations that you can donate and maybe give someone capital instead of thinking of going back.
Right.
Yeah, I've met some ladies from Lebanon as well who have returned back, but like 50% of them have gone back to Saudi, because after you come back home, your family maybe doesn't accept you. You didn't come with money, you didn't come with this and that. So you find someone going back again or being retracted. So it's like our organization basically deals with those people who are willing to come and join us so that we may continue to create an awareness about human rights and human trafficking, about laws in these Gulf states. Where, for example, if you're not paid or you live in a poor living condition, you have a right to reach out to your bosses or employers so that they may give you some decent place to live. If you know your rights, you can't be violated and you can't be accused or go through some troubles that you've encountered. But someone who is illiterate, it's easy for them to go through these challenges.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, yeah, and Teresa, yeah. I have to, because we're limited on time, let me bring Teresa in just for final thought, because you've also seen an issue with cases taking too long to be resolved. We saw the government talking about a mechanism to be incorporated that would see cases resolved at least in 21 days. But how can that be better improved in terms of cases actually being responded to?
Basically, I'll say it is an effort by government, but still more needs to be put in place because currently we still have backlogs of cases. And some of the cases have yet to be responded to. There are so many girls and young boys in distress in various countries of destination, Saudi Arabia just being one of them. And you find besides just those ones who want to be repatriated back home, we have girls that are ailing in hospitals. And to the fact that, for instance, a country like Saudi Arabia, there's only one labor attaché. The kind of distress and the overwhelming millions of workers in that country is beyond his ability to be able to manage all of them at one go. So there are various different cases of distress. We have girls with psychological problems, some of them even being in mental institutions. We have girls in jail, and also young boys in jail. We have those who are also known as runaway because of the distress situations they were undergoing from the employers' homesteads that either pushed them to run away from the employer. So the distress cases are overwhelming. Of course, yes, government is putting some measures in place, but I think we need to come up with the speedy and steady solutions and lasting solutions that can adequately address the distress situations of our migrant workers in the Gulf. Like you earlier mentioned, Victoria, Saudi Arabia is ranking among the third country in terms of remittance. So if we treasure these migrant workers just as we treasure their remittance, then we should put their dignity at first. We should put their lives forefront. And as a country, stand by our citizens who are out of the country to give them dignity that they deserve.
Certainly. Thank you so much, Teresa and Ida, for sharing your personal experiences and insights on this issue of the Kenyan migrant workers in the Gulf countries. It's certainly something we'll be following in the next couple of months here on Citizen. And that does it for Citizen Weekend. I'm Victoria Rubadiri. Our sign language interpreter tonight has been Wilson Mushora. One Love is up next. Bye for now.